The Holy Gospel according to Mark chapter 13. Jesus was telling his disciples about the times to come. Following those hard times, sun will fade out, the moon will cloud over, stars will fall out of the sky, cosmic powers tremble. And then they'll see the Son of Man enter in grand style, his arrival filling the sky. No one will miss it. He will dispatch the angels. They will pull in the chosen from the four winds, from pole to pole. Take a lesson from the fig tree. From the moment you notice its buds form the merest hint of green, you know that summer is just around the corner. And so it is with you. When you see all these things, you know he is at the door. Don't take this lightly. I'm not just saying this for some future generation, but for this one too. These things will happen. Sky and earth will wear out. My words won't wear out. But the exact day and hour, no one knows that, not even heaven's angels, not even the Son, only the Father. So keep a sharp lookout, for you don't know the timetable. It's like a man who takes a trip, leaving home and putting his servants in charge, each assigned a task, and commanding the gatekeeper to stand watch. So stay at your post, watching. This is the gospel of Jesus. Thanks
be to Christ.
Thanks be to Christ.
I think that a lot of us are holding on to our sanity by being outdoors during this COVID time. And a few weeks ago, I had a walking visit with a parishioner on the Grand River Trail between Galt and Paris. And on that segment of the trail itself is typically at least 6 to 10 feet above the level of the river. There are very few places where the river and the trail are kind of at the same height. And as we were walking, I noticed that beaver, who usually cut trees right down at the water's edge, the beaver had started cutting trees and small saplings at the height of the trail. And I thought to myself, what is going on here? What is wrong with these beaver? Have they gotten a mistaken beaver memo? I don't know, because usually they trim their building material from the area where they can readily pull them into the river. And I began to think maybe we're going to have some heavier rains. And that walk happened about 3 weeks ago. And lo and behold, last week we had all that heavy wet snow, followed by all that rain, and the level of the river did indeed rise. The beaver were all ready to do their work, and their dam making materials were cut down ahead of time and placed on high ground so that they wouldn't just wash away. They were alert, they were ready, and they were able to listen to the inner signals that they got in order to do what needed to be done. Now, one might argue that beaver are not, one might argue they weren't operating out of a conscious thought process and it was just instinct. I just wanted to use that as an example. In God's creation, there is a reason for everything and a purpose for everything under the sun. I find that so incredible. God is able to take all difficult and seemingly pointless hardships and craft them into exquisite new directions and possibilities. And this crafting happens under the unseen hands of spirit. It's most readily accessible to us when we are tuned in and paying attention to what is going on. And when I say that, I don't mean tuned into the right TV channel or tuned into the right news channel, but tuned in our relationship with God. As human beings, we are not that good at being tuned in and paying attention to things other than the things we want or choose to focus on. And maybe that's one of the key differences between us and, say, for example, the humble beaver. The beaver is probably functioning on some natural instinct that tells it to respond according to what it is feeling. But we, as we hear in Genesis creation story, we have been given the freedom of choice. And sometimes in my own home, I have to be so careful that I do not get sucked in to tuning into the worst possible things. And most of you know that I don't have TV or a cable subscription. And if I'm honest, the reason I don't have them is because I'm really good at being sucked in. And so if I don't have those things, they're not present to suck me in, right? I find it super hard to stay alert and pay attention for what God might be saying. And so an effort to reduce the distractions around me helps to keep the airwaves open so that I can hear what God is saying. So if you can imagine, I do have internet at home. And when we had our first church closure due to COVID lockdown, I made my own charts. I went on the Waterloo Region website every day, and I went on the National Canadian website every day, and I had a little chart, and I wrote down infection rates and how they were going up. And it was really exhausting, especially in those first 4 to 6 weeks. And some mornings it was all I could do to get up and work on my chart and then fall back into bed. It was just kind of waiting for COVID to come along and kill us all. That's kind of how I felt. And I'm sure that nobody else had that experience. I'm sure that all of you, having had a lifetime of faith practice, I'm sure that all of you refrained from this kind of useless behavior and did not tune into the news the way I was and experienced that kind of frustration and hopelessness. However, I did. And in the gospel reading for today, in the Isaiah reading, when they talk about cosmic powers trembling and God doing terrible things we never expected, making the mountains shudder at his presence, I was there. I was there doing my stats, counting down the death of the world, but it didn't happen. Look at this. We are here in November on the cusp of December, and it hasn't happened. In fact, the curve flattened due to the collective work of love on the parts of all. And as the weather grew nicer, we enjoyed our summer. Sure, we had to wear masks, and absolutely, things were very different. But we experienced hope and light again. And if we look at the closures that have happened here in Canada, they really have happened on account of all of us having to move in due to the weather. Because in Jamaica, they had a bit of a second wave back in September, and they locked everything down, and they're back to being more open now than they were back in September, because they don't have to stay indoors to keep warm. The notice of closures, though, it brings a cloud again. And as much as I was recommending and in support of physically closing our church, I realized that it caused a huge reaction for me. Emotionally, it caused a huge reaction for me. It brings a shuddering, and maybe a harder one, because now we know what it's like to go through lockdown, as well as we wait to see what will happen at Christmas time. Jesus predicts the crazy things that are going to happen in our world. And then he says, take a lesson from the fig tree. Now, I don't know about you guys. I don't have fig trees handy at my house. I know that I have a sizable maple tree that overhangs my driveway. And I know that spring is actually around when the maple tree starts to drip sap. I remember the first year it happened, I thought that something was wrong. And then it occurred to me, no, nothing is wrong. This is actually what maple trees are supposed to do. I have looked up images of fig trees, big leaves and yummy purple fruit. And before Haida switched our screen, you had a picture there of a fig tree with the fruit on it. Now, like most of our trees in the winter months, this fig tree becomes skeletal. It's stripped down to nothing, like a certain savior we know, and subject to the elements. But it is unmoving, unwavering in those winter months. It does not try to run away. You don't see the fig tree pick up its skirts and wander off, right? It doesn't try to run away. It doesn't try to hide in bright, shiny distractions or cloak itself in tinsel. It doesn't engage in retail therapy or frequent walks to the fridge or pantry just to see what might be good in there. It doesn't smoke pot. It doesn't drink liquor. It doesn't overeat or indulge in assorted online debauchery. It stands there, naked, alert, waiting for the signal creation will give that it is time. And when it gets that signal, it begins to send forth shoots. Green begins to appear at the tips of the naked branches, and before long, it is in bud, in flower, and in fruit. I really, really wish and pray that I had more fig tree ways about me. I wish I could stand the stripping down that lockdown causes in ways that are so solid and so faithful. I wish that I don't run for the cover of distraction. I don't run for the cover of power to get everything back to how I like it, to how I've gotten used to things. Even if how I like it was too busy or too inattentive to the Spirit, too much about being of the world than of the light that Jesus has given to me. I wish and pray that I could be more like a fig tree. It's easier to cope with the loss of control and the calamitous feeling all around by scrambling around for busy work, anything to cover the nakedness of my stillness, anything to cover that skeletal vulnerability of dear beloved God just waiting. And isn't it something that here we are in Advent, the season of waiting, having our first service by Zoom? Just waiting for a signal from Creator. Waiting like this requires a vulnerability. It requires sitting still, yet being alert, being present, not distracted. And like the beaver, it requires responding to the inner nudges that we get about what to do. I'm not recommending that you go and start chewing down trees at this point, okay? Just saying. Turn off the noise, turn off the news, turn off the radio. Listen to maybe the clock ticking, maybe the sound of traffic, a dog bark in the distance, the sound of the furnace or boiler tripping on and off, sitting quietly, alert, and listening. It's incredibly hard work. I remember at the beginning of our first lockdown, when we just were getting used to doing online services, I remember Brad making the sound recording from his backyard, I think it was, of the bird song that went into our land acknowledgement this morning. It takes a certain gift to listen and actually hear the birds sing. But if you do this, if you sit quietly, alert, listening, you will encounter something magical. And I've come to call this magical thing the COVID evolution. I'm not saying that it will be easy, but if you take this time to sit quietly, gently removing all distractions and being alert, you will hear God. You will feel God. You will encounter your unity and oneness with God in whose image you are made. And you will encounter a deep and abiding peace. And that peace might nudge at you not to chew down trees, but maybe to reach out to someone, to write a note or send a card, to make an offering of yourself in some way. Maybe to take a walk with someone if you can, or talk with someone on the phone while they walk. That place of peace will nudge you to notice things in nature, to notice the bird song, notice the busy work of the squirrels, and notice where the beaver are cutting things down. It will nudge you to notice the steady, constant beat of your own heart. And that place of peace will nudge you to creative ventures as well. To sew, not me, but for some people, to sew, to knit, to write, to crochet, to sing, to dance. It will lead you away from anxiety, pushing you into the crest of the wave of the unfolding realm of God's light. God is at the door of your heart. And when we say that, we often imagine God on the outside of that door, knocking to be let in. But what if the indwelling Jesus is knocking from the inside of that door, just waiting to be let out, to play with you? But you can't hear that knocking because you're too busy with watching the news. Jesus says, take a lesson from the fig tree. From the moment you notice its buds form, the merest hint of green, you know summer is just around the corner. And so it is with you. When you see all these things, you know he is at the door. Be alert. Remain awake. Do not be distracted. Do not try to cover your vulnerability up. Bring yourself soul naked, limbs exposed like the wintered fig tree. Bring yourself naked of fruit or flower or bud. Bring yourself into the evolution into which COVID invites us. The evolution of vulnerability and tuning in to Creator. The evolution of letting Jesus, who knocks on that door within us, the evolution of letting our inner Christ out. Amen.